They laughed at the coin on her desk, a ghost owl on a battered piece of bronze, a joke. They saw only Gunnery Sergeant Vance, a quiet logistics clerk with a cold face. She pushed papers, invisible to the arrogant lieutenants. What they didn't know was that the coin was a symbol, and the woman they ignored was a legend. Not yet. Until a 4-star general walked in, saw the coin, froze, and honored the sole survivor of a unit that didn't exist. Welcome to the Beacon of Truth channel. What city in the world are you watching this video from today? If you like stories of hidden humility and unexpected moments of truth, consider subscribing to our community. The early October air over Camp Pendleton, Southern California, was taut and dry. The first of the Santa Ana winds had begun their annual pilgrimage from the desert, carrying with them a restless heat that shimmered above the asphalt and baked the brown hills a shade deeper. It was an atmosphere of simmering stillness, a world holding its breath. Inside the muted gray walls of the base logistics building, Gunnery Sergeant Kaelan Vance cultivated her own world of absolute order. At 29, she moved with an unnerving economy of motion, her tall, athletic frame honed to a purpose a few could guess. Her golden blonde hair was imprisoned in a severe, tight bun at the nape of her neck, with not a single strand escaping its discipline. Her face, framed by high cheekbones, was a study in neutrality, a beautiful but unreadable mask for the thoughts churning behind intense, assessing blue eyes. Her office was an extension of this control. Pens lay in perfect parallel alignment, files were stacked with geometric precision, and the air smelled faintly of clean paper and ozone from the computer monitor. The only object that seemed to defy this rigid order was a battered bronze coin, its edges nicked and worn smooth with time. It sat atop a stack of requisition forms, its weight just enough to defy the breeze from a lazy ceiling fan. Beneath her desk, a dark furred shape twitched in its sleep. This was Nix, an 8-year-old Belgian Malinois whose sable coat was the color of shadows. A veteran of 2 tours, he was lean muscle and coiled energy even at rest, a small chip missing from his left ear, the only visible mar on his otherwise intimidating form. He was Kaelan's shadow, her confidant, her silence made manifest. The sterile peace was broken by the squeak of polished boots. First Lieutenant Braden Thorne, known to his clique as Apex, swaggered through the doorway. At 25, he was the embodiment of Academy Polish, tall, classically handsome, with dark, perfectly styled hair, and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He carried himself with the unshakable confidence of a man who believed the world was designed for his benefit. "Gunnery Sergeant Vance," he announced, his voice dripping with condescension. "Still holding the fort with that old bottle cap?" He gestured toward the coin. "I swear, that thing probably has more operational history than the rest of us combined, just from fighting off the wind." Kaelan's fingers didn't pause on her keyboard. "It's functional, Lieutenant." "Functional?" Thorne scoffed, leaning against her doorframe. "So is a rock. What is that emblem anyway? A fattened pigeon?" "It's a ghost owl," Kaelan stated, her tone flat, mechanical. It was the same tone she used to order spare parts or confirm shipping manifests. "A ghost owl," Thorne chuckled, sharing a look with the 2 other lieutenants flanking him. "How terrifying. I bet it strikes fear into the hearts of unruly paperwork. Tell you what, Vance, we'll pass a hat around. The Officers' Club. Get you a proper crystal paperweight, something that matches that icy disposition." A muscle in Kaelan's jaw tightened, the only sign of the insult landing. To them, she was just part of the scenery, an efficient logistics sergeant whose quiet demeanor and refusal to engage in social niceties made her an easy target. They saw a woman, not the warrior who instinctively positioned her desk so her back was always to a solid wall, her eyes commanding a clear view of every entrance. They saw a coin, not the last sigil of Intervention Team 7, call sign Night Owl, a unit so secret its dissolution was followed by the systematic erasure of its very existence. When their laughter finally faded down the hall, Kaelan allowed herself a slow, controlled breath. The real threat to her world arrived an hour later. Master Gunnery Sergeant Michael Croft was a Marine carved from a different era. In his late 40s, his face was a roadmap of sun-beaten deployments, his shoulders broad, and his graying hair buzzed to the scalp. He was a man of regulations, not because he lacked compassion, but because he'd seen firsthand the chaos that ensued when rules were bent. He respected Kaelan's flawless work ethic, which made his words all the more heavy. He stood before her desk, holding a tablet. "Gunnery Sergeant Vance," he began, his voice a low gravel. "I have MWD Nix's quarterly physical assessment report. The veterinarian has noted progressive mobility decline in his right hind leg." Kaelan's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage of ice. The board, a clean, sterile term for a process that would decide if Nix was still a useful asset to the Marine Corps. "Master Gunnery Sergeant, the injury is old," she managed, her voice miraculously steady. "It doesn't compromise his operational effectiveness." "A limping MWD is a potential liability, Vance," Croft stated, his eyes filled with a pragmatic regret. "In a tactical scenario, a moment's hesitation can cost a Marine his life. The board convenes in 2 weeks to determine his service status. I need you to prepare his records. Be professional about this." Professional? The word hung in the air long after Croft had gone. Kaelan leaned down, her fingers sinking into the thick fur on Nix's neck. The dog stirred, looking up at her with an intelligent, unwavering gaze. The memory hit her like a physical blow, the deafening roar of an IED in a Kandahar alley, the world dissolving into dust and pain, and Nix, throwing his body over hers, taking the shrapnel that had been meant for her. The limp was his medal, a scar earned saving her life. Now, that same scar threatened to tear them apart. This was her real war, not against arrogant lieutenants, but against a system that saw her hero, her only remaining family, as an asset with a faulty part. A week later, the dry Santa Ana winds had been replaced by an electric tension that crackled across Camp Pendleton. The source was a single name, passed in hushed, reverent tones: General Samuel Morrison. The 4-star commander of SOCOM was on base, an unscheduled visit that sent a shockwave through the chain of command. General Morrison, in his early 60s, was a living legend. He was a tall, spare man with a hawk-like intensity in his gray eyes and a face etched with the gravity of decades spent making impossible decisions. His presence made the very air feel heavier, more significant. For Lieutenant Thorne and his entourage, it was a prime opportunity. Their boots were glossed to a mirror shine, their uniforms were impeccably starched, and they strategically positioned themselves along the general's likely path, hoping for a moment of recognition. That opportunity came in a form none of them expected, when the general, bypassing a scheduled tour of the firing ranges, made a snap decision to inspect the logistics supply chain. His arrival in Kaelan's building was preceded by a wave of nervous energy. Colonels and majors scurried ahead, their faces tight with anxiety. When the general stepped into her office, the ambient hum of computers seemed to die. Thorne and the other junior officers flattened themselves against the far wall, trying to look essential. The base logistics colonel began a nervous, data-heavy briefing. General Morrison listened with a disciplined stillness, but his sharp eyes were in constant motion, absorbing the room, the personnel, the workflow. And then they stopped. They locked onto the small, insignificant bronze coin on Kaelan's desk. The colonel's voice faltered as the general raised a hand, cutting him off mid-sentence. The room fell into a profound silence, broken only by the whir of the ceiling fan. Morrison moved away from the briefing officers, his steps deliberate, and walked directly to Kaelan's desk. Thorne felt a knot of confusion and dread tighten in his stomach. With a reverence that seemed utterly out of place, the general picked up the coin. He turned it over in his fingers, his thumb tracing the worn relief of the ghost owl. The hard lines of his face softened into an expression of deep, sorrowful respect. "Operation Whispering Shadow," he said, his voice a low rumble that resonated with old pain. He wasn't speaking to the room, he was speaking to the coin, to the ghosts it represented. He lifted his gaze and, for the first time, truly looked at Kaelan, seeing past the gunnery sergeant stripes to the soul behind her eyes. "You're Echo 4. I read your after-action report, the only one that ever came out of that valley." The air went thin. Lieutenant Thorne felt the blood drain from his face. Whispering Shadow. It wasn't just a mission, it was a ghost story. A cautionary tale whispered in Spec Ops circles about a unit that went into the Hindu Kush and simply vanished. And Echo 4. Echo 4 was the sole survivor, a figure of mythic, tragic proportions. He hadn't just mocked a gunnery sergeant's paperweight, he had desecrated a monument. He had mocked a ghost. Kaelan met the general's gaze, and for a fleeting moment, the mask slipped. The profound sorrow of a lone survivor flickered in her eyes before being suppressed. She gave a single, sharp nod. "Yes, General." Morrison carefully placed the coin back on her desk, as if it were a holy relic. "It is an honor, Sergeant," he said, his voice clear and carrying, a stark rebuke to any who had ever seen her as anything less. The moment the general's entourage swept out of the room, leaving a stunned silence in its wake, the whispers began. But Kaelan barely heard them. Her battle had already moved to a different front. Master Gunnery Sergeant Croft appeared at her door, his face grim. "Vance," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Because of the general's visit, all administrative boards are being expedited. They want the base's readiness reports looking perfect. Nix's review board has been moved up. It's tomorrow morning. 0800. The words hit her with the force of a physical blow. All her carefully planned arguments, her search for precedents, vanished. She had less than a day. "Be prepared," Croft added, not unkindly, before leaving her alone. The irony was crushing. As the base began to buzz with the legend of Echo 4, Kaelan Vance sat under the fluorescent lights, a ghost in her own right, fighting a desperate bureaucratic war she was almost certain to lose. She pulled a fresh appeal form from her drawer, a long shot based on a vague regulation about special value tactical assets. With the whispers of her own heroic past echoing outside her door, she began to write, her words a desperate plea to save the future of the one being who knew the whole truth of that past. That night, the sky broke. The promised storm arrived not with a whimper, but with a savage roar, a curtain of torrential rain lashing the coast and turning Camp Pendleton into a labyrinth of wind-whipped shadows and slick asphalt. At 0200 hours, under the cover of a particularly violent thunderclap, the base's northern perimeter fence was breached. Simultaneously, a localized EMP burst turned the R&D sector into an electronic dead zone. Lights sputtered and died. Security feeds dissolved into static. Backup generators coughed once and failed. Chaos was the perfect camouflage. In the hastily assembled temporary command post, the chaos was palpable. Lieutenant Braden Thorne stood drenched, his face pale in the erratic glow of emergency lanterns. He yelled into his radio, but the only response was a crackle of static. His academy training had prepared him for structured engagements, for battles with clear front lines, not for this disorienting blindness. His men were scattered, responding to contradictory reports, chasing ghosts in the storm. They were reacting, and they were losing. Miles away in her silent office, Kaelan hadn't flinched when the lights went out. Her finely tuned instincts, honed in places where a power failure was a prelude to violence, screamed a single word: attack. Nix was already on his feet, a low growl rumbling deep in his chest, his body a tense line of coiled muscle. She didn't wait for orders that would never come. Orders were for soldiers in a system. She was an operator in a breach. From a locked footlocker, she retrieved her old gear, a lightweight plate carrier, a thigh rig for her M9 pistol, a single ear, encrypted comms piece that operated on a defunct ghost owl frequency. A ghost talking to no one but herself. She checked the action on her pistol, a smooth, familiar click, and strapped a tactical harness onto Nix. Her movements were fluid and economical, a deadly dance of preparation. "Time to go to work, boy," she whispered. They slipped out into the maelstrom. The wind and rain were a physical assault, but to Kaelan, they were allies, masking their sound and scent. She didn't run towards the frantic shouts of the response teams. She melted into the deeper shadows, moving along a path dictated by tactical logic, not by panicked reaction. She knew the target wouldn't be the barracks or the command center. It would be something of value, the R&D lab. As they navigated a service alley between two large supply depots, the cold rain began to seep into Nix's bones. He leaped over a discarded pallet, but his right hind leg buckled slightly upon landing. A soft, pained whimper escaped him. Kaelan's heart clenched. Croft's voice echoed in her mind. A liability. For a gut-wrenching second, she felt a flicker of doubt. Was she pushing him too far? Was her fight to keep him endangering them both? But Nix recovered instantly, shaking his head as if angered by his own weakness. He looked up at her, his intelligent eyes burning with a fierce loyalty that transcended pain. He would not stop. As they prepared to move on, he suddenly froze, his body rigid, the fur along his spine bristling. His head snapped to the left, towards a dark corner where shipping containers were stacked. A low, almost inaudible growl vibrated through him. Kaelan didn't question it. She pressed them both flat behind a large generator unit, her hand resting on Nix's back, feeling the vibrations of his warning. He wasn't smelling the rain or the wet concrete. His flared nostrils were catching something else, a scent that didn't belong, the acrid tang of Russian cordite and a specific unfamiliar brand of rifle oil. Seconds later, a three-man patrol materialized from the darkness. They were phantoms in black tactical gear, carrying short-barreled rifles with an efficiency that screamed special forces. The lead operative, a broad-shouldered man with a clipped Slavic accent, spoke quietly into his throat mic. Zone 2 is clear, moving to final objective, no resistance. They passed less than 10 feet from Kaelan's hiding place, completely oblivious. The man's cold, professional voice sent a chill down her spine. These weren't common thieves. They were professionals, hunting on her territory. As their footsteps faded, Kaelan gave Nix's neck a firm squeeze. Croft was wrong. The system was wrong. A machine could measure a limp. It couldn't measure this. It couldn't measure the instinct, the senses, the unbreakable partnership forged in fire. Nix wasn't a liability. He was her early warning system, her partner, and tonight they would remind everyone what a true ghost owl could do. They continued their silent advance toward the lab, leaving the disoriented response teams far behind. The hunters had become the hunted. The confrontation at the lab door was over in less than 30 seconds. It was a blur of synchronized violence, a brutal ballet set against the percussive drumming of the storm. Kaelan's first shot didn't kill. It shattered the radio on one guard's vest, the impact spinning him around. In that same instant, she gave the command, a single sharp word. Fass! Nix exploded from the shadows. He wasn't just a dog, he was a dark projectile, a force of nature that slammed into the second guard, taking him down in a flurry of disciplined fury. As the two breachers turned, startled by the sudden chaos, Kaelan was already moving. Two more shots, perfectly placed, struck each man in the thigh, severing muscles and dropping them to the slick concrete. They were neutralized, not executed. It was the ghost owl way. Absolute efficiency, minimal excess. When Lieutenant Thorne's drenched and disoriented quick reaction force finally arrived, they skidded to a halt, weapons raised, expecting a firefight. Instead, they found a scene of eerie, controlled stillness. 4 professional mercenaries were incapacitated on the ground, zip-tied with a speed that defied belief. The team's leader was pinned beneath a stoic Nix, whose low growl was the only sound besides the rain and the groans of the wounded. And in the center of it all stood Gunnery Sergeant Kaelan Vance, her M9 held at a low ready, rain plastering her blonde hair to her temples. Her expression was utterly calm. Thorne stared, his mouth slightly agape. He and his team had been running in circles, blind and ineffective, while this one woman and her dog had ended the entire incursion. The shame was a cold, heavy weight in his gut. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the air washed clean and the base unnaturally quiet. Before the official debriefings could begin, Master Gunnery Sergeant Croft appeared at Kaelan's office. He held a tablet, but his usual rigid posture was gone, replaced by a quiet contemplation. "I've seen the reports, Vance," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. He swiped a finger across the screen, showing her a grainy clip from a restored security camera. "I saw how Nix detected that patrol. I saw him take down a man twice his size to protect you. I saw him follow your commands perfectly, even with that limp." He set the tablet on her desk. "My entire career, I've trusted the regulations. They create order. They keep Marines alive. But I was wrong. The regs can measure a dog's gait, but they can't measure heart. They can't measure a bond like the one you two have." He took a deep breath. I canceled the review board this morning. I also personally submitted a formal petition to have MWD Nix reclassified. Kaelan looked at him, her carefully constructed composure faltering for the first time. Surprise flickered in her blue eyes. Later, in the main conference room, the apology she never expected came. Lieutenant Thorne approached her before the meeting, began, stopping at a respectful distance. "Gunnery Sergeant," he said, his voice stripped of all its former arrogance. "I acted like an ignorant fool. I judged you by a standard that didn't apply, and I was completely wrong. What you did last night, there are no words. I am truly sorry." Kaelan held his gaze for a long moment, then gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "Apology accepted, Lieutenant." The meeting was a formality. General Morrison lauded her actions as a masterclass in initiative and unconventional warfare. But the pivotal moment came when Master Gunnery Sergeant Croft stood. "General," he said, his voice firm and clear, "I officially recommend Military Working Dog Nix be reclassified as a specialized tactical asset, permanently assigned to Gunnery Sergeant Vance. Last night, he wasn't a liability. He was a force multiplier." General Morrison smiled, a rare and genuine expression. "I couldn't agree more, Master Gunnery Sergeant." He looked at Kaelan. "The order is already signed. He stays with you. That partnership is a weapon system we cannot afford to lose." That evening, Kaelan sat in her quiet office. The base hummed with a newfound respect for her, a respect she had never sought but had undeniably earned. The ghost owl coin rested on her desk, its bronze surface catching the soft light. Beneath her desk, Nick snored softly, his body relaxed in a deep, trusting sleep. The wars of the past were over. The fight for the future was won. For the first time in a very long time, Echo 4 was at peace. Here is the concluding message for the story. In the end, was it just lines of code and a clever fix that brought the Colossus back to life? Or was it something more? Sometimes what we call skill is actually a gift, a small miracle placed in our hands by God. The true miracle wasn't just a machine roaring back to life. It was the miracle of a hardened heart, like Gunny Kowalski's, opening up to a new idea. It was the miracle of a new generation finding its voice. God often works in the quietest moments, through the talents He gives us, to change the world one heart at a time. Each of us has a unique, God-given gift. It might not be understanding the soul of a machine. It could be the gift of patience, a talent for kindness, or the ability to see a solution where others only see a problem. Like Evie, you may feel that your gift is misunderstood or overlooked, but have faith. Your moment will come. God has a plan for the unique abilities He has given you, and He will place you in the right situation at the right time to let your light shine. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need encouragement to believe in their own gifts. Let us know in the comments below about a time you witnessed an unexpected talent change a situation. And be sure to subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire faith and hope. Thank you for watching. May God bless you and your loved ones. And you're loved.